Welcome everyone to the Intelligence Spotlight series. As always, we feature people who are working in the world of open source intelligence, as well as investigative journalists and those who are concerned with finding facts and truth and telling us what's happening behind the surface of the information that we're dealing with on a daily basis. Today we're joined by Sarah Cammarata, who is a senior intelligence analyst and OSINT specialist based in London. She investigates global white-collar crimes at a leading corporate intelligence firm with a focus on due diligence and strategic investigations. Previously, she worked as a journalist in Washington, D.C., reporting for Politico and Stars and Stripes on defense, Congress, and the Pentagon. Her transition into the open source world in investigations was shaped by her reporting experience and her MA in War Studies from King's College London, which is the world's renowned and best Department of War Studies, I would say, and that's my favorite as well, where she researched the mainstreaming of the alt-right narratives. And Sarah also teaches digital investigations methods using social media at the Center for Investigative Journalism. She also regularly speaks at conferences on open source verifications. I think you were there in one of the recent conferences there. And also her investigative writing has appeared in The Wired, particularly on her investigation on the alt-right groups and Telegram, and where they would harass women and dox them. And we will talk more about that piece as well. Sarah, very warm welcome to the Intelligence Spotlight series.
Thank you so much. That's quite an introduction. Happy to be here.
We're glad, and thank you for accepting the invitation. Usually, this is not my habit, but I always start with a quirky question. What is your favorite dish, and which country has the best food in the world?
That's a hard question. I would say best food in the world is probably Italy would be my choice. Favorite dish, probably just something Italian, some pasta dish. Like I'm not picky, but huge fan of Italian food.
Makes sense. Makes sense. It's perfect time for Italy vacations usually.
Yeah.
And yeah, pasta is always good. And I actually like Italian food generally, they have global significance as well. Like if you see most countries, they also have similar food, but in a different way, but also
Yeah.
they trace back because, goes back to the Roman Empire as well.
Yep.
Well, let's begin with your journey. A shift not many make. You started your career as a journalist in Washington, and now you're in London. That's one change. And then reporting for Politico and Stars and Stripes on topics like defense, Congress, and the Pentagon. Now you're deeply embedded into the world of private intelligence and OSINT. Could you walk us through that transition? What were some of the unexpected lessons each field taught you, and how has that crossover shaped your investigation lens today?
Absolutely. I think it's not as rare as you might think to make the transition from journalism, especially investigative journalism, to intelligence because there are so many crossovers. So, definitely one of the things I learned in journalism was thinking on your feet, how to write clearly, concisely, how to report the facts and not introduce bias to your reporting. Obviously, that's important for the intelligence report writing as well. So that's one of the things, but also the investigatory mindset. I mean, that's going to be the same in journalism to private intelligence to, corporate intelligence, financial investigation. So I think there are a lot of transferable skills. People who are journalists will move into corporate intelligence. They want something new, maybe something not so 24/7. So maybe the work-life balance. But yeah, so I took a lot of the journalism skills, some of the OSINT techniques I was doing already. I just didn't put the name OSINT to it. So digging into documents and public records and tracking narratives using social media, and that's very transferable to what I do today. I think one of the challenges in corporate intelligence is one thing is you have a very different audience. So just keeping that in mind, you're not writing necessarily for the public interest. You might have a client, so it really shapes what you produce. And also intelligence report writing is obviously more technical in a way. So you wouldn't kind of think of the narrative in the same regard. So the storytelling aspect is obviously quite different. So I think it's a challenge for some to shift. I did find it a little bit easier, kind of shifting from journalism to academia again to get my master's and then intelligence. So I had kind of a period in between so I could kind of shift my mindset at that time. But overall, yeah, there are a lot of crossovers between the fields.
Yeah, definitely. And that is one of the reasons we try to have that crossover here at the podcast series as well, bringing
Yeah,
journalists, experts, people, basically people dealing with information. That's what it is.
right.
I think that's
Yep.
the crossover. If you're dealing with information, you're one of these people.
Yep. Exactly.
So, but interestingly, I had discussions with people, of course, with different groups, and not many people know OSINT, or the ones know they associate OSINT with conflict
Mm,
or misinformation, but its role in the financial crime is just as critical, right? And often it's less understood too. You've worked on those complex corporate investigations for sure, many involving also cross-border finance and corruption cases, right? Could you maybe unpack how open source techniques are applied to uncover financial wrongdoings and perhaps share what kind of sources or patterns OSINT excels at detecting in this domain?
absolutely. So I typically look into individuals or companies. So often both, but especially for individuals, looking at the subject's digital footprint can be really fascinating to verify the information you've been given. Because even from official sources, let's say, you always have to verify what you've been provided with what might be out there in the open record. You don't want to just take even if, financial statement or any other sort of document that's been provided, you want to try to verify it based on other sources. So that's
Right.
where open sources can come in. And social media is often very interesting because it will provide insight into a subject's interest, or even, which we'll talk about Telegram, but I do find it quite interesting to look into a subject's Telegram footprint and see if there are any kind of public conversations that they've been having or any groups that they're in that might kind of lead you down a certain path that you might not have found. So it also reveals connections, maybe corporate interests through the creation of even a Facebook page, or
Mhm.
it might bring or an Instagram page of a company. And then you kind of piece that together. So the corporate can often coincide, especially with what's on social media, because a lot of companies will, have a social media presence online. So that can give you a lot of information. So there's quite a bit out there. Of course, the open sources in terms of databases and things like that. But I would say social media comes into play. Obviously, public companies have loads of public documents out there that you'll want to comb through and kind of make sure, is what's being put out by the company the same as what is happening internally? Is there a
Right.
discrepancy? So I think there's a really big use for OSINT to help verify and even find some new information as well.
Right, right. Based on your experiences, what are the main tools used in financial investigations in OSINT, or maybe some databases you want to point at?
The very obvious one is open corporates for journalists. That is, and for anyone working in kind of the public field, you can get access to that. So I'd say that's really a great tool to provide corporate information. Beyond that, North Data also provides corporate records, loads of details, specifically in certain jurisdictions, but those are kind of the big corporate databases. And I would say there are loads of country specific as well databases. So some paid, some not. So I would say that really varies, but at least those are kind of the top two ones that are free to use. And I'm trying to think of anything else. A lot of the ones that I use, of course, are paid. So
Yeah.
I'd rather not share those just because they might not be as accessible if you're working as a freelancer or
Mhm.
you kind of want to just dip your toes. But there are other, so as I said, jurisdiction specific. So in the UK, we have Companies House. So that's a huge
Mhm.
resource that you want to use, even though not everything there is accurate. So companies can post, for example, unaudited accounts. So you'll want
Mhm.
to be verifying again everything that you find. with a primary source, ideally. In the US, of course, there are all the states have different corporate databases. So there are loads of things that are free. It's just you sometimes have to dig to find them, specifically in jurisdictions that are more high risk or they have less accurate documentation. But I use all of those very frequently, even though we do have the paid databases. You don't need them, they just can be helpful in certain cases.
Right. But generally accessing them, going through the data they have, it's similar to also to the open access databases, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And also another um, kind of subset, if you're looking into, I don't do this regularly, it's not a daily practice, but some cases we come across crypto or blockchain. So there are open on-chain tools that you can use to verify transactions. I'm looking to historical transactions as well. So in that space, there are going to be free resources that you can use in that regard as well.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I actually took a course on the from the Basel Institute on Governance. They do
Mm,
provide an online course on different sort of investigations, but primarily they focus on the financial aspects. And it was quite interesting how OSINT is also a major part of it. But above all, it's your mind that is important in the financial investigations,
yeah.
how critical you are, how analytical you are, and how good you can differentiate with numbers, because at the end of the day, you also deal with numbers, registration numbers, and how they're interconnected. Let's say an example would be we do have ship tracking, right? And how ship tracking could be used in this case, how people dodge using flags or registration in one country, doing trades in another country. So it's quite interesting field, I would say. Moving from that, because you've worked also extensively on the gender aspect of those investigations. And gendered harm in digital spaces also is one of the most insidious forms of online extremism, but yet it's often siloed from how we discuss disinformation, right? And the
Mm,
radicalization aspect as well. Your Wired piece, I read it and it was quite interesting, that exposed Telegram communities that shared non-consensual content and
yeah.
harassed women, basically derived from revenge porn. That's, I think, the term that was used. A form of extremism that's both intimate and systemic. Based on that research, how does gender shape the way hate manifests online? And which platforms today do you see as breeding grounds for this kind of disinformation and abuse, especially ones that investigators should be watching more closely?
Yeah, so just to start with the first question, so I would say misogyny, systemic misogyny is a key kind of entry point into the online targeting with abuse and harassment and doxing of, I would say, disproportionately women, LGBTQ women, trans women, other women of color, for example. So misogyny is kind of the underpinning of this type of abuse online. And this is kind of how I would look at it in a way, especially the manosphere. Misogyny is a huge part of this kind of online ecosystem that is discussed quite a bit, but I think definitely more resources and attention can be put into investigating it. Absolutely. So in terms of the platforms, I think that it's interesting because with my investigation, what I noticed is that even though we didn't do a comprehensive look at the narratives spreading and how they spread, but we did notice some trends. So
Mhm,
even where kind of information can start spreading on Facebook and Facebook groups, which is a kind of what we might consider as more a mainstream platform that's been used, of course, for decades, and then it kind of moved to, at least in this instance, to TikTok, where we've seen absolutely disinformation, misinformation, hate speech be able to thrive. And there has been a focus on TikTok, which I think has been really important,
mhm.
especially the way the algorithm works in sometimes feeding you more extreme or hateful content and suggesting this type of content to you. And then what we saw is the conversation moved to Telegram, which I think we, as investigators, do know that a lot of illicit activity happens on the platform. Telegram has said that they do take groups down and listen to reports, but we've seen from the evidence that it is a breeding ground for hate and these types of
Hmm.
online abuse. So I think even when you consider a social media platform something that's regulated or there has moderators, there's such an extreme amount of information flowing into the platforms. It's a very difficult task, even when there is moderation. And there is policy. So not to say that this is the platforms shouldn't take more accountability because I think they should, but there are the more kind of what we consider fringe platforms, maybe like 4chan and some of these kind of message boards that you can look at, but there are still the platforms that billions or millions to billions of people are using every day, in which this type of information can spread. So I think even continuing to look at these platforms is very important. There are so many different kind of topics and threads to explore there. There's not enough investigators to kind of look into this, and I think definitely keeping the focus on these platforms is a good thing.
Right, right. Yeah, it is not just like one platform, but I sometimes try to understand why, first of all, extremism thrives much better now in online platforms than, let's say, in physical spaces. And in your opinion, based on the experiences you had, do you think the combat against online hate has increased or decreased given the recent political changes in our world, and particularly with the moderations in social media channels? Do you think online hate is increasing at the moment, or is still it's kind of countered by the investigators or people who are working in the moderation aspects of content on social media?
It's a hard question. It's not, something that I look at specifically. I guess what I do know is that efforts to moderate hate speech, we've seen changes on Meta's platforms recently, the rolling back of protections for LGBTQ plus people in what's considered hate speech. I know that, of course, X has become less protected in terms of a space where this type of information can thrive. So I'm positive that there have been reports and studies done where you're seeing more extreme content on X. So with those two things in mind, I wouldn't be surprised if there is an increase, but I guess I can't definitively say. It's not something that I look at, but it's definitely something to consider.
Right.
And of course there are in the U.S. and the administration and obviously that will have an effect, but yeah, I can't say for sure.
Right, right. Yeah, so I guess better to zoom into your latest investigative work, of course, without breaching confidentiality. Maybe could you tell us about one of the recent investigations you've done, how you approached it, what tools or methods you relied on, and what kind of verification challenges you faced during that process?
Sure. The most recent investigation, public investigation, separate from my full-time job that I wrote with Anna Wolf, who is a freelance journalist who covers mental health and women's issues. We worked together to report on this, as we somewhat discussed already, this network of Telegram groups and channels that were formed in retaliation against women who were posting in the Facebook group, Are We Dating the Same Guy London? And Are We Dating the Same Guy London is part of this sprawling network of over 150 groups across the world where women were sharing experiences and information to kind of help each other stay safe while dating. And these Telegram groups were targeting women, specifically women of color in the UK, with doxing, harassment, and various forms of online abuse. And so our investigation actually began quite organically. We weren't necessarily searching for a story, but Anna was in that Facebook group already, and she saw the posts from people who were warning about the Telegram group. So this kind of made us think, oh, I really want to know more about what's going on. I had an interest in Telegram. Anna wanted to shift more into investigatory work. So as I kind of mentioned before, the conversations moved from the Facebook. They were kind of amplified on TikTok. And then most of the illicit activity was happening on Telegram. And so, how we went about this, all of the information that we used in the story was public. So, we didn't have to infiltrate any Telegram groups. That's not what we were doing. And that would kind of introduce other ethical and legal considerations before doing so. So we did not do that. But we did use this public data that we could see without joining the group. And this was made available through a tool called Telemetry.io. It started as well, it is a analytics tool, but it's very key for investigators who are interested in Telegram because it will have kind of an archive of some posts and kind of statistics on subscriber counts into Telegram groups and channels, even when the channels or groups are closed. So you can sometimes find information about these, even if you can't find it on Telegram currently, they're not active. So we decided to analyze, there's about 4,000 messages from one of the groups on Telegram that's kind of linked to the wider network of Telegram kind of revenge groups. And yeah, so this is where we gathered, scraped the information. We took the information in the posts and we analyzed the narratives and kind of the operations that were happening. And we saw that these users were systematically tracking and doxing and degrading women from this Facebook group, circulating phone numbers, location data, usernames, and non-consensual intimate imagery. So the key tool there is, as I said, Telemetry.io. There are loads of other databases and platforms that you can use for Telegram investigations. It's just one
All
of
right.
them. So that was key to our investigation, but as well, just looking at TikTok using advanced search methods and on Facebook as well. So kind of those bread and butter techniques that you'd
Mhm.
learn as a beginner.
Right, right. Um, by working in that case, actually, what did it teach you overall, either about the subject maybe or about the limits and strength of what were you doing?
Yeah, so there are limitations with our approach that we really focused on a kind of data heavy investigation. We didn't bring in the narratives from victims themselves or any kind of human element. So that might make it less personal to the reader. And there were other pieces done on kind of the subject of are we dating the same guy? And they brought in these kind of people to share their stories from survivors, people who are posted in the group. So that kind of provides a different lens. Our approach was strictly looking at the data, looking at the trends, sharing what we found as kind of an insight into how the groups were operating. So it didn't cover in depth the offline harms as well. We did talk about it a
Got it.
little bit, but really digging into how the online can really affect the offline. And I think that's
Right.
something I definitely learn more about. And also the challenges that the police say that they are facing, or what they kind of explain as the challenges of this online abuse. And we spoke to experts in this space to kind of discuss the revenge porn helpline and other organizations. And so we really relied on their insight every day, trying to kind of work to combat this type of abuse and learn more about kind of the challenges that law enforcement and these kind of organizations that are really focusing on this. I think that was really interesting to see.
I guess it's very important. That's the work you're doing is it's crucially needed as well at this time and age. And I believe from the investigator side, when I also do investigations on topics that maybe I haven't done before, or maybe the geography or the context is new for me. The good thing about the whole process, though it's a lot stressing, especially if you're dealing with a sensitive topic, you have to be wary of your own mental health as well,
Mm,
especially the vicarious trauma. But at the same time, you learn the things that normally people wouldn't see. You see the nuances in that topic. You see what motivates something, how it emerged, how people think about it, and that you are actually trying to insensitivize the whole thing and be the face of the fact finder or what's happening or just the explainer. Sometimes you don't have to go check the facts. You have to explain to people this is what's happening, and this is how it needs to be dealt with based on this law, that regulation. This is against the law, and people should pay attention to it. So, on that case, I guess let's have an imaginative scenario, which I really love usually with investigators to think about what normally we want to do, but we can't for me based on some limitations. Let's say if you're given or handed 100,000 Great British Pound grant to investigate anything of your choice over the next 3 months, that's the timeline, with a total freedom, no institutional oversight at all, and full editorial independence, what would you choose to investigate and why? What would be the workflow you would take, and where would that story take you overall?
It's a tough question. There are loads of things. I feel like there's never enough time, especially with, journalists and investigators. I think, well, a topic that I'm particularly passionate about, is personal to me, I think would be kind of continuing the work that I started with the Wired investigation, but specifically focusing on the LGBTQ plus community and how in hate speech against the community, I think I'd specifically look at trans people. And that's especially with kind of some of the changes, at least been in the UK recently, the US as well. Trans people have always been a target of abuse, but kind of I would want to look at, yeah, what the patterns are, how that's also affecting people's mental health and the real, the offline impact as well. As I
Mhm.
said, the online does have a real world impact, which I think sometimes can be forgotten when it's looked at simply on, the digital side of things. So
Right.
I'm very passionate about that. That's very broad, so I'd hopefully narrow it down
Mhm.
specifically. But I think with that sort of money, I'd also need some help. So I was thinking how I'd use that with a 3 month scope, would probably want maybe some software engineer, not even software engineers, but like more data science kind of experts to kind of maybe help look into using AI to analyze language, bringing that into to look at, a big wider data set than I would normally be handling. Obviously, with the wire piece, it was, looking at a few thousand, but maybe we're talking about hundreds of thousands or kind of millions of piece of content or whatever it is. So yeah, I think I can't think of the exact workflow. I think it would take more time to figure
Yeah,
that
right.
out and what I'd find. Obviously, it depends how you're approaching the subject. If you have kind of this hypothesis in mind already. I haven't discovered that yet, but I'll get
Right.
back to you, if it ever happens.
Yeah, yeah. I think that makes a good project, honestly. That's a doable project, having your own team working on
Yeah,
that and also bringing these new innovative ideas like using AI in this sense,
yeah,
because this is something people have just started talking about it. With AI, there was this whole discussion of how negative it is actually. But I think what this reveals is quite the opposite. It shows how AI could be even more helpful and speeding up the whole process of investigations, data collections, analysis, and all of that. And that's interesting. I'm inspired. So thank you for sharing that. I hope
absolutely.
nobody else is going to copy this quickly. But even if they do, I think it's for the good cause.
Absolutely. No, I hope they do.
Right, right. Sarah, I may have forgotten something, or I haven't. Is there something that you really wanted to share for the listeners or people who are watching? Maybe something about a tool, something that you just discovered in the open source world, because you also teach to students and people in the field. Tell us something that they should consider it, especially in this time and age, given the discussion around AI and yeah, just something, sentence, a message you want to share with them.
Sure. I wouldn't want to leave off with a tool. I think, as you mentioned, a tool is just one piece. It's really all about the investigative mindset and your ability to kind of analyze information. But I think I did want to bring back something you mentioned, which I would love to spend more time talking about, and hopefully you'll have another guest discuss it. But vicarious trauma and
Uh,
kind of the mental health consequences of this type of research and investigation, this type of work isn't for everyone. There are other things that you might consider. Initially, I was really interested in um, being an OSINT analyst and looking at really heavy and dark imagery or videos all day. And I think for me, I am glad that I didn't go down that path after more consideration, even though it's extremely important and it's not for everyone. So I think that's something to consider when you're maybe just starting out. You know, is this really something that I want to expose myself to? I mean, it's very, again, very important, but it's not for everyone. I mean, even just working on this, approximately 1 to 2 month investigation, it was challenging. And it's important to recognize in your, it sounds maybe cliche, but recognize in your body and like recognize the changes that you're having, even with your mindset or how you feel, and take breaks. And there are tools now that can blur sensitive imagery so you can kind of make the conscious choice to click on it. But I'm happy that I'm seeing, even just on LinkedIn, for example, more people talking about vicarious trauma and OSINT. But yeah, it's just something that you might want to consider and definitely take seriously, and take care of yourself.
And definitely, we'll take that seriously for sure. And this is the thing, humans take care of each other, and we also have to take care of ourselves in a way we have taken care of others, because in that way we can continue what we're doing. And you can continue what you're doing with your amazing work. Thank you, Sarah, for joining this episode of the Intelligence Spotlight series. I hope you do well, and I hope to see that project enrolling soon.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been really fun.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.